Welcome to Bradford and Brooks with your host, Margie Bradford and Jim Brooks, live on WBRT here in downtown Bardstown. The show is sponsored by Springview Hospital in Lebanon. Thank you for listening to 97.1 FM, 1320 AM, and 94.9 FM in Lebanon. Bradford and Brooks, a civil discourse of discussion where community involvement is encouraged. Bradford and Brooks is on.
All right, good morning, Bardstown and Nelson County, and welcome to another Bradford and Brooks. Jim Brooks and Margie Bradford with you this morning. Kind of a crisp, overcast day. I think there's rain in the forecast. I think I heard Roger say. But tomorrow looks a little better. It's going to be 64 degrees, I think, is the high. And tomorrow is a great day for a parade, Margie.
Oh, it sure is.
Yep, we'll have the Bardstown, the Kiwanis Club Christmas Parade kicks off tomorrow at 6 p.m. WBRT will be covering it live starting at 6 here on the radio. And let's see, there'll be live music. Our music will start at 5:15 in front of the Visitor Center there in LaCourte Square. And then the parade starts at 6. So, and I suspect there are other people in addition to myself who are preparing their parade entries and still putting on those last touches, which I'll still be doing tomorrow morning, I'm sure. So anyway, look forward to a real live Christmas parade this year. And it'll be taking the traditional route coming up West Broadway from 5th Street to North 3rd and then down North 3rd to the Court Square and then out on West Stephen Foster. So if you're bring the family out tomorrow, starts at 6 p.m. and get there early to get a good street side seat.
Are you got your automobile ready to go?
My 56 Plymouth will be all lit up and and which has taken some. Now last year I got to use a generator to power the lights. Now I've got to figure out a little different method to do that. But anyway, it's all going to work.
All going to work.
Yeah,
all right.
I spent yesterday afternoon stringing lights, so. And then restringing them when I didn't have them right. So anyway, the perils of being a parade entry owner.
Well, that's one thing I don't have to worry about.
Well, I was going to have you ride on the hood, Margie.
Well, now I may change my mind there. I get out there and perch on the hood. That would be a sight to see.
Yes, it would. All right. Well, Margie, let's get down to business here. As promised, Margie and I have two special in-studio guests with us, and we love to have our guest in the studio with us in this post-COVID period. Anyway, our guests are the president and our President and Vice President of Nelson County Citizens Advocating for Responsible Education, right. Or as it's an acronym, NC Cares.
Right.
And that's Jack Seay and Courtney Higdon. And I know that you all sent out a press release, and there's so there's information out about what you guys are for, but I'll let you, Courtney, either you or Jack can fill our listeners in who may not have heard about NC Care and what you guys are advocating.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Because I know you all are a nonprofit organization.
It is.
Aimed at quality education.
Right.
Right. Well, thanks so much for having us on today, Jim and Margie. You're exactly right. Just as you said, we are a nonprofit organization. We've recently organized with the goal of just what you said, advocating for quality education for our kids here in Nelson County. So that's our primary focus. We want to make sure that our kids are getting the best possible education that they can here in the county.
And we want to emphasize that it's not just about Bloomfield.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's fair to say that that's what caught our attention when this thing first started.
Right.
But since then, we've dug into it a little bit further and have decided we need to speak up for the students in the entire county.
All right. Well, I know that the community campus plan that the local planning committee approved a couple of weeks ago, that would eventually result in the closure of Bloomfield Middle School. And I know that that's been a concern for, I think both of you guys have spoken at the various meetings about that being a concern to the community as well as others from the Bloomfield area.
Well, that's correct, and Bloomfield Middle is one of the more successful schools in the county.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't really see that there's need for any change. The board adopted a district facilities plan in 2019 that we think is still adequate. What the board is trying to do now is to amend that plan in mid-cycle,
Mm-hmm.
and we've yet to see the case for that.
Well, honestly, I don't even remember the much about that last district facilities plan.
Well, it mainly kept things the way they were, except they were going to do something in New Haven, which has been needed for decades.
Absolutely.
And even those plans, it was going to cost, what is it, 27 million?
In the 20 range.
In the $20 million range.
Mm-hmm.
This plan that they're talking about now is $52 million, and that's based on a Department of Education formula that really doesn't reflect the reality of today's prices.
Right. I think that was discussed, that this is that their estimates are just, to come up with a figure and then don't reflect real world realities.
Well, it's to keep every district on the same page in terms of the cost. I understand the reason for it, but with the inflation that's happened, they haven't had time to adjust it.
Right. The well, Jack, I know that districts' priorities change and leadership changes. So, and of course, we've heard. I know the whole reasoning behind the community campus plan is to improve the educational opportunities for middle schoolers. Is that, and since I've been covering the Board of Education, I've seen how New Haven and Boston middle schoolers have kind of come out on the short end of the stick as far as opportunities, well, not just academics. Of course, Boston's, leads in academics, but
they do.
But the middle school students have so small populations that they haven't been able to have all of the additional programming and opportunities that the larger, OKH and Bloomfield Middle have had.
Well, if you look at the literature, Jim, the idea that small schools are not up to par it's not out there. The idea that small schools or large schools are better schools and small schools are bad schools, that just doesn't fly anymore. And Boston's a good example of that. They lead the district and are rated pretty highly in the state in terms of their performance.
Yeah, that's right. Boston's test scores for their middle schoolers are actually, that's the only middle school population in Nelson County where those kids are performing above the state average. So actually their students are achieving in their model.
All right. What would you all like to see happen? As if you could, to improve education. I know that now my kids went to Bloomfield Middle, and it was a great school, and still is. But I will tell you that my family, my son and daughter's friends, almost all of them came from this part of the county. I mean, it was closer. It would be closer for them as middle schoolers to go to either high school than to go to Bloomfield Middle. So, I mean, from that perspective, and the argument that the majority of students don't live in that area, I can see the reasoning for wanting a middle schoolers more centrally located.
Well, we've thought about that, and of course, anytime you change locations, it's going to benefit some students.
That's right.
And cause detriment to others. The students who live in Chaplin and
that's true.
And in Howardstown and New Hope, they're going to have to be traveling much further.
Right.
And the rural areas are going to take the hit again.
Right.
As opposed to the urban areas. So I think when you even it out, it doesn't make much difference. And what we'd like to see is they leave the plan the same as it was in 2019. We think that's still a workable plan. But if there has to be some change, we've heard about the underutilization of schools. Both Nelson County and Thomas Nelson are very underutilized. So one chance to change that would be to make Thomas Nelson a middle school. Those students you're talking about that live in that area could go to middle school at Thomas Nelson.
I think one thing, Jim, that has been a concern for us is just that there hasn't really been, at least from our viewpoint, a really in-depth review of the things like that you're speaking of in terms of transportation, for example. It really hasn't been shown that one model is better than the other model because of this reason, or this percentage of students is going to have a smaller travel time and therefore that's better, or in another model it's different. So it hasn't been really clearly shown that whichever model you might be looking at, that one costs more or costs less, which has a better impact on the operating budget, which has a cost to the operating budget. There really hasn't been a level of detailed presentation of that type of information for, I think, folks to really have a good understanding. Okay, in the connected campus model, actually students on average are traveling less, or maybe they're not. We don't know because that hasn't been presented. Or if there's one middle school and one high school, is that better for the kids from a transportation perspective? Of course, transportation is only one piece of the picture when you look at all of this. I think what's important to me mostly is I haven't seen evidence that this very expensive plan is going to increase my students' achievement in the core areas of math, science, reading, and writing. There's a lot of discussion about the need to increase access and opportunity, and I don't think anyone can argue with that at all. We all want our kids to have access to as many possible subjects and levels of classes that they can, and as many opportunities to participate in extracurricular activities as possible. But I think as a parent, my first goal for my kids when I send them off to school is that I want them to be achieving at benchmark or better in science, reading, math, and writing. So I don't think that's been shared.
I guess I don't understand why you think they wouldn't.
Well, it's not that I don't think they wouldn't necessarily, but it hasn't been shown that spending these tens of millions of dollars can change or better what we're doing now.
Well, according to the articles in the paper, that this move would actually save the district money.
Yes, they did say certainly several times during the LPC meeting that the connected campus model, or the community campus model, would save about $2 million to the operating budget, but they never demonstrated where that savings came from, so it's not really clear how that savings gets achieved, and it also wasn't ever discussed what any of the costs or savings of any of the other models were. So I think it's important to understand those things when you're talking about spending tens of millions of dollars and changing dramatically the approach to how we aggregate our kids in the school setting in the county.
Well, Jack, you mentioned the plan, $52 million, I think was the, now is that the total of all the projects on that?
It is.
Okay, well, of course, that's not intended to be a 1 year or a 2 year plan.
Of course.
And I don't know that they've ever completed every project, on a district facilities plan. It's just they're just their priorities and what needs to be done.
Well, I don't think they've done very few of the existing plans.
Exactly. That's right.
I mean, doesn't that include renovations that would happen whether they adopted a new plan or not?
Right. It's
it's part of an existing plan.
Margie's a 34-year school board member,
Right,
so she's very familiar with that, and the fact that I don't think they probably don't have the bonding capacity to do $50 million worth of buildings.
Well, I think they do.
Do they?
I think they do.
Well, there's also, there are, and you're absolutely correct, there's a lot of things in that dollar amount and outside of that dollar amount that is also listed in the facilities plan. And of course, the board has discretion,
Sure.
as Mr. Bradley has said in the meetings, as to what they implement.
Right.
But I think it's important to recognize that when a district facility plan gets endorsed by a local planning committee that's appointed by the Board of Education and also by the Kentucky Department of Education, one has to feel pretty certain that there's intention for that to move forward over some period of time.
Right.
Well, school districts do have to look down the road. They have to
Absolutely.
look, they would not be doing their, the duty
Correct.
that they have if they didn't look 10 years down the road.
Absolutely
Because they
agree
have
with
to
that.
look at all of the statistics. Where's the population growth? How many students are we going to have in that class in that year, 10 years down the road?
Yes.
And that vision can often be imperfect. Thomas Nelson's a good example of that. A lot more population increase was projected for that area than actually occurred. And those are the kinds of things that can happen to you.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think anybody has a crystal ball of exactly what's going to happen. So it's just as you say, you're having to look ahead and make the best decision today that you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
with the information you have today.
Well, someone once said, life is what happens to you while you're planning your life. So I guess the same goes for a school district.
Yes.
Right, except you're dealing with a lot more money.
There you go.
Well, and I think the concern about test scores, I think everybody has that. Of course, but the pandemic hasn't helped that progress.
That's true, Jim, but when comparing ourselves across the state, we're below the average at all levels in all of the core areas. The rest of the state dealt with the pandemic as well, so certainly those scores were affected too. So certainly everyone had some negative effect to their test scores during the pandemic, but when you compare, that washes out, in of the equation. So, and even prior to the pandemic, when you look at just the middle school test scores, and this was actually presented to the LPC back from 2018 and 2019, I think was, and then more present data, they showed that it was below the state average for all of those years in all of the schools with the exception of Boston.
And we really think that that's what the priority of the school system should be right now. Instead of using energy on a plan like this, let's get those test scores up. Let's improve the performance.
There's no doubt about it, the facility needs have to be addressed.
Right.
And those have to always be on the radar screen. But in our opinion, we need to make sure we're not taking our eye off the ball of what's most important in education, which is teaching our kids the basics, reading, writing, math, and science, to prepare them for whatever their future is.
Right. Now the LPC meets tonight. I didn't know if, of course, the way this process works for our listening audience, after the LPC approves a plan, it goes to the Kentucky Department of Education for their review. And honestly, I wasn't sure it would be back before the first of the year, but they completed their review and it's back, and the LPC had a tentative meeting planned for tonight, but they will go through with it because the KDE has completed their review, and that meeting is tonight the LPC meeting starts at 5:30 to 6:30, and at 6:30 they'll have a public forum, and this is at Bloomfield Middle School, which is, I think this will be the first time the LPC has met at the middle school, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
And just to clarify, they actually decided to make the public forum part of it start at 7 p.m.
Oh,
just to
okay.
allow a little bit additional time for folks who might be working
Okay.
to make it over to the school
Okay.
to participate. But typically, they had been having them at 6:30.
Right, all right, well, thanks for that correction, Courtney. Well, this process decision-making process isn't over by any means, because the LPC will meet tonight, and I suppose they have an opportunity to address whatever feedback the Kentucky Department of Education has given them. And, there could be additional meetings. I don't know what, or will they, you think they'll approve it tonight?
I think they will.
And
I think the committee's got blinders on and they're headed to the barn.
So if the LPC approves it tonight, it goes on to the Board of Education.
Correct.
for their review.
And bear in mind, they just received the Kentucky Department of Education comments yesterday. So it gives precious little time for these members to digest that, and we've seen them, and they're complex. So they've only had a day to look at that.
Wow.
I think that's been one of the things for me that's been a little bit disappointing about the process is I just don't feel from my perspective that the folks that have given their time in service on the local planning committee have in general had enough time to digest the information provided to them, receive other information that they may have wanted, and to go back to their groups that they're on the committee representing to get their feedback as well. So I'm imagining that that may unfortunately also be the case in this situation, having just received comments back yesterday from the Kentucky Department of Education and likely being asked to vote on amendments to the plan in response to those tonight. I don't think they probably will have had an opportunity to get adequate feedback.
Well, I'd expected them to. Well, I would hope they'd have enough time to review all that. I mean, I have no idea what KDE sent back, but I'm sure that after their review, they have plenty of input, and maybe they have questions. I don't know.
Well, and that's part of the thing. We don't see what the rush is on this. Now, the superintendent likes to tout that they've been talking about this for 6 months, but the LPC has not.
Right.
When was the first meeting of the LPC?
Oh,
October the 20th. October the 20th. This is a rush job.
well, I know that Wes and has been talking about it since what? May or June, 6-7 months
Earlier,
yeah. But the LPC I think has met 3 or 4 times. Of course, they had an orientation, and then.
I think it's important to point out too, Jim, that indeed the LPC hasn't been considering these thoughts and plans for but a short period of time. But as you point out, certainly the school district has been out there for quite some time promoting what their vision is for the school facilities back as early as late winter. And you may recall that they received quite a lot of community backlash in terms of those plans that were presented at that time, which are extremely similar to the plan that's being approved or expected to be approved tonight. So we really feel like in general, broadly speaking, there's a lot of community concern about this particular plan that we don't feel is being taken to heart as well as it should be.
Your organization, I know I read in the paper that you didn't have any stated goals yet, so would you care to state those goals now?
Well, I mean, I think that we've kind of been talking about some of those things already, Margie, but thank you for asking.
I'm just saying that
we
as an organization.
Primarily, as we mentioned before, we're going to advocate for the best education for our kids. You know, how do we know what that is? One way to know what that is by looking at how they're performing on test scores. And we've talked about the fact that isn't where it needs to be, in our opinion, at this time. Certainly, that's not the only measure of success for students.
Right.
But we also want to advocate for a relook at the facilities plan. We're certainly not supportive of the plan that's being proposed. But most importantly, it's advocating for making sure that kids and the teachers are getting the resources that they need. That the focus of the district keeps their eye squarely on the ball of those core educational missions, recognizing the importance of access and opportunity to broader experiences. We need to make sure that we're taking care of the primary mission of the educational system there. Jack?
And those are set out. We've started a Facebook page, and we have all those set out if anybody cares to go look at that and see what the goals are. And
NC Cares on Facebook then?
Yes.
Okay. All right, very good. But you know, when I look at this, of course, I've been to a lot of school board meetings and a lot of discussions about finances. I can see this from the financial perspective of the benefit of having middle school students on the same campus with the high school. As far as reducing transportation cost, not that I have any proof of that, but obviously, yeah, you're going to transport students further. Some students who live further, but
those buses are going to be meeting at the same places and taking them. They already go to Bardstown.
the same students.
There's been a lot of discussion in the meetings, as you may know, about transfers that happen
Right.
on the buses.
Right.
And, ride times and things of that nature. And I think it's been, at least my perception has been that it's been presented as if the community campus will alleviate a lot of those problems, but it hasn't been made clear.
Right.
There's been no transportation plan presented that would support this. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, I have children that ride, that are at different levels of education. They get on the bus at the same time. They ride to one child's school, and then one of them transfers to the other bus. Many students in the county do that. And I don't see a way that would change, at least for my kids, in this new model. So it just hasn't been presented that it is a better transportation
Right.
system or that it costs less.
Right.
Now, certainly no one can argue with the fact that when you have larger groups together, costs are likely to be less on certain things because of economies of scale. But again, as I mentioned earlier, that's $2 million savings opportunities. It hasn't been presented to the LPC or even the board that I know of, nor has any other cost model been presented or laid out in pro forma format for any of the other models.
All right. Well, guys, we need to take a commercial break, and we'll be back in just a few moments. You're listening to Bradford and Brooks, and our very special studio guests today, Jack Seay and Courtney Higdon, who are part of Nelson County Citizens Advocating for Responsible Education. And we'll be right back after these messages. Stay tuned. Drew Franklin here. All right, you're back with Bradford and Brooks. Jim Brooks and Margie Bradford here with you till the top of the hour. And then stay tuned for the best in local news and information on WBRT after the top of the hour. Also, don't forget the Bardstown Christmas Parade is 6 o'clock tomorrow through downtown Bardstown. It's the Bardstown Kiwanis Club Christmas Parade presented by WBRT and WOKH. There will be holiday music starting at 5:15 in front of the old courthouse, also known as the Visitor Center. And then the parade will kick off at 6 p.m. It'll come down West Broadway from 5th Street and then turn left on North 3rd Street, come down through the middle of town and again out West Stephen Foster. So you don't want to miss it. There's going to be it's going to be a good parade with lots of entries. So I'm looking forward to it. After last year, we had a static parade where the entries were parked, and then people came through Dean Watts Park and could see them. So it was kind of a reverse parade. The people moved instead of the floats. So, but anyway, looking forward to a traditional Christmas parade tomorrow, 6 o'clock, downtown Bardstown. All right, we're back with our studio guests too, Courtney Higdon and Jack Seay, who are president and vice president of the Nelson County Nelson County Citizens Advocating for Responsible Education. And as Jack said, the group what really caught you all's eye was the local planning committee and their work, and then the community campus model, which would eventually end up closing Bloomfield Middle School.
That's right.
But you all have are taking got a wider scope now as far as you just advocating for better education and I would dare say responsible use of resources when in the county and not I think it's hard to when you're looking at facilities as you mentioned earlier, Jack, it's hard to look in your crystal ball and see where that need is going to be for school buildings. As you mentioned, Thomas Nelson, and it's high schools being underutilized. But you make the best of what you can as far as your best selection. But I know there's a lot of people that question the need to eventually close Bloomfield Middle School as a successful middle school. I mean, my kids went there, and I have a very high opinion of the school. But in a revised district facilities plan, it could be shuttered and those students moved to one of the high school campuses.
Yeah, one of the things is the board has tried to say it's not the responsibility of the Board of Education to support a community.
Right.
And that's a fair statement. But when you close a school and move those students lose the support of the community. A lot of it goes away because people are just not able to go that distance. And that's not being considered.
I would like to just also go back and say again to Jim and Margie that really, in our view, the case for this dramatic change in the organization of the students of the county, moving to a 6 through 12 model in the connected campuses, really hasn't been made. It's just been generally stated that there will be more access and more opportunities for those students, but it hasn't been empirically shown what that is, how it will affect the student achievement. I think one of the big concerns a lot of folks have throughout the county, and this isn't a Bloomfield issue, this is a county issue, is am I comfortable with my middle school students being in that close of a proximity to high school students? And certainly there are good examples of where school districts have organized their various levels of education on the same campus, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about in the same building. So the current district facilities plan that's being proposed would have all of the middle school students and high school students at Nelson County in particular within the footprint of the existing building.
Right.
Now, they do propose an addition to Thomas Nelson to accommodate some of the middle school students there, but there's some question at this point in time where the KDE is going to support that additional square footage, recognizing that facility is already underutilized. So it could potentially be at Thomas Nelson that those middle school students as well are in the same footprint building, bricks and mortar, as the high school students. And there's parents out there that have good concerns that need to be heard about that particular issue.
And if we're reading the plans correctly, for example, in Nelson County, they intend to take part of the nice auditorium we have and make them some kind of spaces that would take away from the auditorium area.
From the auditorium or the gym?
The auditorium.
Oh.
There are a lot of details in both of these plans that haven't really been gone through with a fine-tooth comb by the LPC, because honestly those folks haven't had time to do that because the planning process has been rushed, as Jack said earlier. So when you have the time to pick through it, you realize that there's some things in there that kind of make you raise your eyebrow and say, well, why would we want to do that? If we're combining all these students together in one facility, why would we want to take away from the auditorium space? Or why would we want to do this? Or why would we want to do that? So, what we're advocating for certainly is slowing down the process to make sure people really have time to thoughtfully consider the implications of this big decision.
Well, it is a facilities plan, so do you have an alternative facility plan that would take care of the concerns that the school district has about having adequate facilities for all students? So have you come up with that?
Well, it depends. If underutilization is the issue, and we think it may be, although we haven't really had them say that specifically, then I think the plan of putting the high school students in Nelson County and bringing the middle school students to Thomas Nelson would be the answer. It would be much less expensive. Take care of the transportation concerns and so forth. Build a new school in New Haven, which they've needed for decades.
Right.
As you know, too, there were several models considered during the process, during the several meetings that they had. Another model, which also has merits, all of them have merits and negative things about them. There's no doubt about it. So it's a balancing of, the costs and benefits of each. But one of the other models was the East-West Middle School model.
Right.
So that contemplated actually constructing a brand new middle school to represent the West Middle School, and OKH would be designated as the quote-unquote East Middle School. Well, if you have an opportunity to go through the numbers and look at the plan, you can have 2 middle schools in this county without building a new middle school. We have capacity in Bloomfield and OKH. OKH is actually severely underutilized to house all the middle school students. So that plan could be enacted without spending $20-some million on a new middle school. That was brought up at the meeting by one of the LPC members as a question as to whether that had been contemplated. And the architect's response to that was, well, OKH is not west enough. So that can't be a solution. That was their response to that. So I'm not sure if they had actually thoughtfully considered that even at all. So there are different options. All of them, as you have mentioned before, have positives and negatives. But we would like to slow that process down so that people can thoughtfully consider those. And we think there's less expensive ways to achieve the access and opportunity and better utilize our facilities, as Jack mentioned.
Well, I think the Board of Education may have some thoughts about, for example, taking space from the Nelson County Auditorium. It's a wonderful auditorium.
It is.
I would hate to see, it impinged or used for some other purpose than its intended purpose. But the board hasn't weighed in, and I mean they've attended some of the meetings, and I think that we don't know where they each stands right now, but like I said, the process isn't over yet. But we will see. We'll see what happens tonight, and tonight will be, I guess, an opportunity during the public forum for people to sound off, to make their voice heard again.
Yes, we would certainly like to remind folks out in the community about the public forum tonight at 7 o'clock. And of course, the LPC will be meeting at 5:30, and we would just encourage them, if they have the time, to come out and hear what the discussion is and to make comments about their thoughts on the proposed plan.
Right. So much of the focus from a lot of the comments, not all of them, but a lot of the comments seem to be on preserving Bloomfield Middle School. But from what I'm hearing from you guys is that it's much more than just keeping a good middle school open.
Oh, it absolutely is. It is. There's a lot of things that need to be done in Nelson County. Let me mention one thing about the crystal ball. We haven't taken into account the school choice movement that's going on. There's a new law. Students can go to whatever school they wish. We've been told through open records that the county school system lost 272 students between February and the end of the school year. A lot of people have indicated that if they close Bloomfield, they're going to send their students to Spencer County or Washington County, or they may homeschool them, send them to private schools. There's a lot more choices now than there used to be.
Right. In Nelson County, we're kind of blessed with having multiple opportunities.
Right.
We have educational. We have educational opportunities here that not many communities can say they have. Across Kentucky.
Yeah, that's the challenge actually that needs to be front and center in the school districts, the county school districts' consideration, is that they're not the only show in town, okay? And we are blessed that we have different options for our kids in this community. But it's a competitive environment nowadays, even in public school systems, because of school choice. So even more so, we need to keep our eye on the ball to make sure our students are achieving, because if they're achieving, then parents will want to send their kids to those schools.
All right.
Didn't you say there was a question from a...
we had a caller that had a question, but we couldn't get to the caller.
I see.
We don't have enough headphones for everybody in the studio to hear what a caller might say. If you have any questions you'd like us to pose, you can text them to our studio line, 348-2222, and we'll consider them here in the studio, and I'll pass them along with our guest. And just a reminder about that meeting tonight. The LPC meets at 5:30, and the public forum is 7 o'clock. So if you want to make your voice heard at Bloomfield Middle School, and if you want to make your voice heard, this may be your last opportunity, at least in front of the LPC, because if the district facilities plan draft is approved tonight, it'll go on to the Board of Education for review at some upcoming meeting. And the way this is kind of being fast-tracked, I would expect sooner than later.
We would expect that. Now, the Board of Education does have to hold a public hearing.
That's right. That's right.
As part of this.
I forgot that. They'll have to have a hearing ahead of time.
So there'll be that opportunity to talk to the board about it.
Right. All right. Let's see. All right. If you have a question, you can text 348-2222. Please don't text while you're driving. Pull over, or use if you figured out how to use it, you can send a text by using voice command. I'm not that advanced right now. I do good to get both thumbs working. But our guests are Jack Seay and Courtney Higdon with Nelson County Citizens Advocating for Responsible Education, and I don't think anybody can fault the concern that you guys have. I think there are huge needs in the district, and to me, New Haven, their facility there is in dire need of complete replacement, I think. And I think the draft that the LPC approved, I think it was just for renovations, which will help. But I think it's the oldest building in the district, I think.
Well, we're breaking a promise that the board has made to New Haven, as I said, for decades.
I know it.
And, of course, New Haven is right on the LaRue County line.
Yeah.
And there are going to be students going to Hodgenville to school from Nelson County.
How many students are in that school, do you know?
Let's see.
And that's strictly elementary.
In New Haven, no, it's actually a kindergarten through 8th grade. Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. We have one question was, do the high school leaders or the school board leaders, they've been made aware of the test results, and have they been publicly released yet?
Well, I can't speak for all the board members, and certainly haven't combed through the minutes of past board meetings myself, but I did have a brief conversation with one board member after the middle school test scores were presented to the LPC at one of its early meetings, and that particular board member said that they had not seen those test results or any other test results recently at all, and that they don't typically get presented that information. That was one board member's perspective on it. So.
All right, and well, this was a question I think you guys asked. Why didn't they utilize the previous LPC or the district facilities plan the previous LPC had approved?
That's a really good question. A really good question. We don't have the answer for it, but they've talked about the cost savings, even though they haven't determined what specifics are on that. The research we've had is that the biggest cost is teachers and personnel, and they're not proposing to lay off teachers. So I don't know where the savings is going to be.
Well, I'm assuming it would have to be in just the eventual closure of Bloomfield Middle, just not having to operate a building anymore. There would be some savings there.
Yeah.
That's what one would assume is where the savings would come from, Jim. But you have to remember that in the proposed district facilities plan, there is also a substantial amount of space proposed to be added to Thomas Nelson. So despite the fact that the plan intends to close Bloomfield Middle School, it would add quite a bit of space at Thomas Nelson. So effectively, you're not getting the net decrease in square footage to the system that you would think you would in terms of operating expenses, both from mowing, cleaning, all the things it takes to take care of a facility. So I think it's that's why it's puzzling about where that savings comes from and why that hasn't been presented, because it's not really clear that could happen.
You've talked about the underutilization of Thomas Nelson, so what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, the stated capacity of the school per student ratio is too low, and the Kentucky Department of Education is concerned about that. We think that may be the impetus to try to resolve that problem with the KDE. We don't know how much pressure is being exerted on the local board to do something about that, because it's way underutilized, especially when you consider juniors and seniors are not in the building. They're counted as students, but they may be there 1 or 2 classes a day.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing too. I'm glad Jack mentioned that. The high schools are underutilized, and that data has been presented to the LPC. So that's out there and that's public information. But what a lot of people don't really understand is what Jack just said, which is that seniors in particular typically are not in the building at all their senior year, except for maybe to take 1 or 2 classes. So they're participating in co-op opportunities or doing other things. But from a parent's perspective, and I have 2 children that are about to be seniors next academic year, I'm just learning about this fact that my kids are only going to be required to take 1 course, 1 semester their senior year to complete their graduation requirements. And now I'm put in a position to scramble to ensure that they have some academic rigor next year during their senior year, so that they don't have a gap in education between when they graduate from high school or when they finish their work and they matriculate on to either technical school or a 4-year college.
Right.
They don't have any AP classes?
Well, certainly they do. And my children, for example, are taking dual credit and AP classes during their coursework, but they will still have their graduation requirements completed very early, nearly at the end of their junior year. I don't want them sitting around their senior year not taking classes when I'm expecting them to move on to post-secondary education after they graduate high school. So that's a concern out there as well from an education standpoint.
That's not a facilities.
No, that has nothing to do with
No,
facilities. That has to do solely with curriculum.
Right.
All right, guys. Well, we are down to the wire. We're just about out of time. Jack, thank you, and Courtney, thank you both for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
And explaining what NC Cares is all about. Margie and I will be back next Wednesday with another Bradford and Brooks, and we look forward to talking to you all again. And so stay tuned for the news at the top of the hour, and we'll see you next week. Have a great week, and don't forget tomorrow night's Christmas parade, 6 o'clock. Take care.